chair must be a member of the government party. I'm ready to receive motions for the chair. Mr. Fredescados?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I nominate Ken Hardy.
It has been moved by Mr. Fredescados that Mr. Hardy be elected as chair of the committee. Any further motions? Is it the will of the committee? Oh, is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? I declare the motion carried and Mr. Hardy duly elected chair of the committee, and I invite Mr. Hardy to take the chair.
Well, I'd like to thank the Academy. So if the committee is in agreement, I'd like to invite the clerk to proceed with the election of our vice chairs. Are we all good? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House on Monday, May 16th, 2022, there shall be one vice chair from each of the recognized parties. I'm now prepared to receive motions for vice chair from the official opposition. Ms. Dancho?
Madam Chair and Madam Clerk, or Mr. Chair and Madam Clerk, I'd like to nominate Michael Chong for vice chair for the official opposition.
It has been moved by Ms. Dancho that Mr. Chong be elected as vice chair of the committee from the official opposition. Are there further motions?
Oui. Monsieur.
Mr. Chairperson, if I may. Yes, it's carried. I'd like to propose that Stéphane Bergeron be deputy chair for the Bloc Québécois.
Bergeron, but we'll do the election for the bloc after.
We have you looked after, sir.
Is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? Agreed? Then I declare the motion carried and Mr. Chong duly elected vice chair of the committee from the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the vice chair from the Bloc Québécois.
Oui.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to nominate Mr. Stéphane Bergeron as deputy chair for the Bloc Québécois. It's moved by Mr. Brunel-Duceppe that Mr. Bergeron be elected vice chair of the committee, Bloc Québécois. Is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion?
Oui.
Yes. I declare the motion carried and Mr. Bergeron is duly elected vice chair of the committee, Bloc Québécois.
I'm now prepared to receive motions for the vice chair from the NDP.
Madam Clerk and Mr. Chair, I'm very pleased to nominate Heather McPherson as the Vice Chair from the New Democratic Party.
It has been moved by Mr. Oliphant that Ms. McPherson be elected as Vice Chair of the committee from the NDP. Is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? I declare the motion carried and Ms. McPherson duly elected NDP Chair of the committee. Over to you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Madam Clerk. I think we are blessed with one of the very experienced clerks on the Hill who will be undoubtedly invaluable to the person sitting in this chair over the next little while. Before we get to kind of the official, well, we'll do some of the official stuff first and then get into the routine motions. So welcome to meeting number 1 of the House of Commons Special Committee on the Canada People's Republic of China relationship. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. I'd like to remind all those present in the room to please follow the recommendations from public health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on November 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe. As the chair, I'll be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, or for as long as the measures themselves last, he hastens to add, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me so that we can suspend for a few moments to ensure all members are able to participate fully. So there's a few formalities out of the way, but I wanted to just add a quick note that I've been interested in this committee since it was first struck. Living on the West Coast, as does my honourable member from South Surrey White Rock, we're kind of at ground zero for a lot of the concerns, especially the domestic concerns about our relationship with China. And it has been very interesting to watch the proceedings from the last Parliament, to see the work that the committee has done, because it resonates very, very well with what I've noticed over time. There may be times, in fact, when I will regret being here and not there, being able to ask some questions and try and coax out a little bit more information on what is, I think, and has been pointed out many times, a very complex relationship. There's upsides and downsides to it, and obviously as a group we'll accentuate the positive but deal something with the other. So with that, I'd now like to suggest that the next order of business be that the committee now proceed to considering our routine motions. In preparation for this, the committee clerk has circulated a list of routine motions that committees have typically adopted. And as we go along, the committee clerk can also answer any questions about the routine motions that you may have. So it's customary that somebody on the government side take the lead as leading us through the routine motions. Mr. Oliphant.
I will do. I don't have to do them all, but I'm happy to start with them. And we'll begin with the one with respect to analyst services. And then I would move that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its work.
Now, I would suspect that some of these routine motions may be the subject of further discussion, so perhaps it would be best if we it's indicated our approval of each one individually as we go through. That sound okay? So, all in favor of analyst services? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you.
I'm going to invite Brendan Naif to the table.
Pardon me?
Would you like to invite Brendan to come to the table?
Yes, our analyst, Brendan, of course.
Now he gets paid.
Yeah, well, we've... Come on down. There we are. Make yourself comfortable. I must say that in the 6 years that I've been here, I have nothing but total awe and respect for the analysts to absorb all of the things that they hear and then to turn out some pretty wonderful studies that we can present to Parliament and consider for ourselves. So thank you, Brendan. Good to have you on board. Shall we continue?
Oui, pour le deuxième.
Yes, the second, that the subcommittee on agenda and procedure be established and be composed of the chair and one member from each recognised party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration.
Sir.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairperson, I'd like to amend this motion and replace the text that my honourable colleague just read by the following, and I'll read slowly for our interpreters, that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and composed of 5 members, the Chair, 3 VPs, and one of each member of each recognised party, and that the committee work in a spirit of collaboration.
Mr. Oliphant?
Just by way of clarification, a committee of 5 individuals, or is that 4? 5, the chair, 3 deputy chairs, a member from each recognised party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration. I don't understand the difference between the first original motion and your motion. Well, basically, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairperson, through you, for the purposes of discussion, well, the number of members would be the following: 5 individuals, 5 members.
Okay. Do we have that written down? It's oral? I know it's oral. That's firm grasp with the obvious there, Mr. Chong.
Monsieur le Président, si vous me permettez.
Mr. Chairperson, would you like me to send it through to the clerk immediately so it can be shared with everyone? Honestly, it's just a technicality. I think that we should adopt it immediately and move on to other business.
We have it? The suggestion is made that we simply adopt this, same as, damn is to swearing to you, use an old expression.
Monsieur le Président.
Would you...
Mr. Chairperson, if I may, if this is too complicated for everyone, I can withdraw the motion. It won't make a huge difference. It's just a technicality. Basically, if it's too complicated for folks, I can withdraw it. It makes no difference to me, frankly speaking. It's a technicality. Our party recommends this each time that a new committee is struck. But if it's too complicated, I can withdraw it.
Does everybody understand the motion?
Or he's offering to.
Or do we need to read it out? Because we do have the text here.
Chair, I understood what my colleague read.
Okay. So the motion is that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and composed of 5 members, namely the chair, 3 vice chairs, and 1 other member from the government, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration. That's it. I think, I think that we can we say that that's accepted? Are we good? We are good. Okay. Thank you.
And the third one, are you ready for Mr. Chair? That the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive and publish evidence when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition and 2 members of the government, but when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begins after 15 minutes regardless of members present.
All right, everybody's heard the motion. Any comment? All in agreement? Opposed, if any? That's carried then. Mr. Chong.
Yeah, I'd like to present the next routine motion on time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. Now, I understand that there's likely not going to be support for this, but I do want to just read it out to make a point that in the hope that members will consider it for a future committee or in the next parliament. So let me just read out my proposed routine motion for the rounds. The chair shall divide equitably among all the other members of the committee the time available for questioning a witness appearing before the committee, providing that a member may share or transfer his or her time to another member. Que le président
that the chair shall divide equitably among all of the other members of the committee the time available for questioning a witness appearing before the committee, provided that a member may share or transfer his or her time to another member.
Mr. Chair, the whole reason for presenting this motion is that it would divide the time remaining after opening witness statements equitably amongst the 11 members of the committee. There are 5 members of the committee from the ministerial party. There are 4 from the official opposition party. There's 1 from the Bloc Québécois, and there's 1 from the Democratic Party. And my observation, Mr. Chair, has been that the routine motion that was adopted, that has been adopted in other committees, that is very different than this one, effectively means that 2 members of this committee get 45% of the time on most committees, simply because we often have 2 one-hour panels. And once you get through that opening round of 24 minutes, and then you have 5, 2.5 minute rounds, that effectively 2 members of this committee get 45% of the time after 2 one-hour panels are completed. And that means that the remaining 9 members of this committee are left with dividing up the approximately 55% of the time. And I don't think that's equitable or fair. I think simply taking the time remaining for questions and comments after opening witness statements and dividing it by 11 members, with those members who wish to yield the floor to another member of the committee, is a far more equitable way to divide the time. And I hope it's adopted, but if it's not, I hope members will think about it and potentially have it adopted as a routine motion at a future first meeting of a committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Comments, questions, Mr. Oliphant?
I just want to thank Mr. Chong for that. I think he's raising an important point. My concern would be I'm not sure we're ready to be a trial of this system, that we think there should be discussion among all the committees about how it works. On the substance of it, I think there are 2 values. One is that we have, each one of us are here as an individual member of Parliament coming from the House of Commons to a committee. But at the same time, we're also here as a team, and so we present a party point of view. And so Mr. Chong's motion helps with the first part about the individuals each having equal time, but it takes away from the concept of it being a team effort, where we would then sacrifice somewhat to the smaller teams for them to have team time, we'd call it. So at this point, we would not support this motion, but would prefer the usual routine motion.
Mr. Chong?
Yeah, and just very quickly, because I don't want to waste any time on this, just to demonstrate how it would work, Mr. Chair. So let's say we had 1 hour panel with 1 witness. That witness would be given 5 minutes for their opening remarks. There would remain 55 minutes after, in that hour, after the witness gave their opening testimony. The chair would take the 55 minutes divided by 11, and each member would be accorded 5 minutes for their questions and comments. If a member isn't interested in taking their time, they could yield the floor to any one of the other 10 members on the committee, whether it's in their recognized party or not. If, for example, and I'll finish with this, if it was a single panel of 120 minutes, and let's say there were 2 opening witness statements, there would remain approximately 110 minutes left in the rounds for questions and comments. That would be divided by 11. Each member would get 10 minutes for questions and comments to a witness, with those members who don't wish to use their time yielding the floor to another member of the committee. So that's how the system would work if this routine motion were to be adopted. And I'll finish there, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Ms. McPherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also would thank Mr. Chong for bringing this forward. Obviously, we all feel that the constituents that we represent as New Democrats, as Bloc Québécois, as Liberals or Conservatives, deserve to also have a voice in this place. And so, well, I don't have other colleagues in this committee with me. I think that the New Democrats who elected people in Canada who voted for New Democrats want to see their voices heard. And so I obviously wouldn't support this motion. I think there is something to be said about having that opportunity for different perspectives to be shared, not just as individuals, but as parties, and being able to have that time and that space to prioritize those things that are important to our party, perhaps the values that our party represents as well.
Sir, could you move your name plate around just a little bit so I can read it? No, not that one. No, you, sir. Ah, there we go. Yes, Mr. Brunel de Sep.
Name. That's a shame. Si je peux rajouter.
If I could just tack on to what my colleague from the New Democrats just said, the current motion enables members to share their time already. So I'd be prepared or happy to keep the motion as it stands and that the Conservatives share their time with me. Why not? So I support what Heather has just proposed, and I just wanted to give my 2 cents worth.
Mr. Oliphant, did you? No? Any further comments? We should vote. All,
This one first.
pardon me?
You vote on your vote on Mr.
Yes,
Chong.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So reading again the notice of motion, the chair shall divide equitably among all other members of the committee the time available for questioning a witness appearing before the committee, provided that a member may share or transfer his or her time to another member. Shall we just do show of hands? Sure. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated.
I might present the next routine motion. I'm not quite sure how to do it because I would like to amend the routine motion slightly to follow the model that we had in the last Parliament for this committee. The last Parliament, I'll just explain it before I move the motion, which is not really good procedure, but the last time we gave the chair authorization to adjust the time of the opening statement in consultation with the vice chairs. And that was just to allow discretion, because there could be sometimes we have one witness instead of 5 minutes, give them 10 because that could be useful. Other times, using your discretion, would be 5 minutes or 7 minutes or whatever. So it worked well, I think, in the last Parliament with this committee. So what I would do then is read it, perhaps with that change in it, which would be that witnesses normally be given 5 minutes to make their opening statement, and that the chair be authorized to adjust the time of the opening statement in consultation with the vice chairs. Continuing that wherever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance, that at the discretion of the chair, during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party, as follows for the first round: Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds of questioning, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois 2.5 minutes, New Democratic Party 2.5 minutes, Conservative Party 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes.
Any comment? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Mr. Chair, I'll take over for the next few, and then I'll yield to Ms. Yip. Just a early warning, I guess. Document distribution. That only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, and only when such documents exist in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Okay, for a really important one here, working meals, that the clerk of the committee, at the discretion of the chair, be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees.
Who would object to that? Oh, I'm sorry, that's not official. Any discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed, if any?
Good.
We're good. Thank you.
On travel, accommodation, and living expenses of witnesses, that if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses, not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that, in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
Any comments? All in favor? Oh, sorry, Mr. Ogden?
I think there's a problem with the translation there. It's a problem with the cut and paste. It's repeated from the previous routine motion in French.
One problem.
Do we have a solution for this?
He read it, so it's...
I read it, so it's fine.
We're good? All right. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Okay. I'll continue. Que à moins qu'il en soit.
That unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by 1 staff person at an in-camera meeting, and that 1 additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present.
Mr. Chair, I believe House officer is a euphemism for the whip, is it not?
But we called them that to be polite.
And the leader's office, too.
Oh, and the clerk advises that this could also include the House Leader's office. Which do we prefer? Oh, okay, fine. Let's make this a little bit simpler. And all opposed? So carried.
Continuing, yeah. Que la graphière du comité.
That 1 copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff, a member of their staff, and that the analysts assigned to the committee also have access to the in-camera transcripts.
In our previous committee, we did not. So we did not authorize the analysts to access in-camera transcripts.
Which, frankly, we think is dumb.
Yeah, that was. We thought it was bizarre. So we're suggesting that the opposite happen here.
So you're suggesting that the motion, the routine motion as you read it, be the one that stands? Is that correct? Without
yes.
the additional cutting out of the analyst?
That's right.
All right.
I would just say, Mr. Chair, that none of us can remember why the analysts were not allowed to have access to the transcripts of in-camera meetings. So we can't remember why, and we don't think it was probably a good reason, so we think the analysts should have access to in-camera transcripts.
All right. So that's the motion. Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Ms. Yip, on notice of motion that a 48-hour notice interpreted as 2 nights be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee, unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration, provided that A, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday. B, the motion be distributed to members and the offices of the whips of each recognized party in both official languages by the clerk. On the same day the said notice was transmitted, if it was received no later than the deadline hour. And C, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day, and that when the committee is traveling on official business, no substantive motion may be moved. Hope
Any
I
comments?
read that in a way that helped the translators.
Thank you. Any comments? All those opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Yes, yep.
So I'll just carry on with technical tests for witnesses, that the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration support team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advise the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests.
I believe we jumped over one, but we can handle this one now and then go back to the other. Oh, it's. Oh, it's not. Yes, not considered. Ah, okay. And. All right. Mr. Brunel Doucette.
Oui,
Yes, I suggest that we add to the motion a title which would be the following: Technical Tests for Witnesses.
Very good, thank you. Any comment on that? Any opposed? Okay, we'll consider that an amendment, and we'll amend it, and then again, any opposed to the motion as amended. And we're good. Thank you.
Linguistic review, that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department or members' offices or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to members. That all meetings other than those deemed in camera be televised, or if that is not possible, then webcast.
I think we jumped to an additional one there. Yeah, that's two different ones, although it looks to be the same the way it's laid out on the paper here. So the first part of that, except for the television or webcasting, the first part prior to that is what we'll consider now. Mr. Brunel Doucette, you had your hand up?
oui, ben, c'est-
Yes, in relation to the second motion, I just wanted to add the title, or the first motion, Linguistic Review, because in my party we like titles.
All right. Are we all good with that? All right. Then let's make it so.
It doesn't appear in the minutes anyway.
Okay. Very good. And now,
You want to carry the motion?
I thought we did, but yes, we can carry this motion. We're good as amended. Great. Thank you. Ms. Yip, the final one.
No, I think there's a.
Was it all together? Was that all
No.
one motion? No.
Okay, so I'll read the final one.
Yeah.
So it's titled Television and Webcast.
Oh, I don't. I don't.
That all
have-
meetings, other than those
Sorry, I don't have
deemed
that.
in camera, be televised, or if that is not possible, then webcast.
It looked like they went together, but they're actually different. All right. Any difficulties with this one? Any comments, questions? All those opposed? We're carried. Just as a point of clarification and in deference to our friend from the block, should we have a title to this one?
No, you put a title on.
Oh, you read the title? Do you have a title on your piece of paper?
I expressed the title orally.
You did.
Television and Webcast.
He just came up with that all by himself.
It took him all day. There we are. Thank you. Thank you. So those, I guess, dispense with our routine motions. Is there any other business that we wish to launch into? Mr. Oliphant.
I'm just, with respect to future business and the work of the committee, what I would like to suggest is that we set a date today to receive notices of motion from all members of the committee with a reasonable amount of time for us. We're at the end of the session. I don't think it's on our minds right now. We set a date, and I'm happy for anyone to come up with a date for us to begin our work in September. That would be give us some time to look at the issues that are ongoing and come up with maybe even 10 things, put it in a hopper, and try to come up with a good first couple of studies. Probably 2 studies we'd end up doing to get one going and have a spare study when that one's not going. But I just, I've got 7 or 8 motions ready to go if we needed to. I'd sooner wait and put them all in and take the wisdom from everybody to do that. So if that's agreeable tonight, we would not entertain notices of motion if everyone would agree on consensus. And look to the analysts and the clerk for a suggestion on the best date for something that would be reasonable for you to work with over the summer. I know the House kind of calms down, and we'll be back the 3rd week of September. But if we had a little bit of work done before then, we could get going at the first meeting once the House resumes.
Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with that recommendation, and I would love to hear the date that the clerk would recommend for that. And I do wonder if maybe this subcommittee should meet prior to the first meeting, perhaps, just so that we could look at what those studies we could make that decision.
Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so we're clear here, I didn't quite understand. So I think Mr. Oliphant suggested that we all submit ideas, motions for various studies the committee could undertake before August. Okay, and then, Mr. Chair, the idea then would be that the committee would then, or the subcommittee would then meet after that point to talk about what the committee agenda would be for the fall sitting. Is that the idea? So that we would have our first meeting with witnesses when we get back in September, or would we have, Mr. Chair, an organizational meeting when we get back in September?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest we need an organizational meeting because we're going to have to agree on it, and unless we think we could do that virtually, but I think that there's an issue around virtual meetings, and that if we have a special meeting before the House rises, it has to be in person. Am I right? I'm looking at the clerk, I'm getting a nod, that we're not allowed to have virtual meetings between now and when the House resumes on the 20th of September. So I would think we would probably want to wait till sometime in September.
So, Mr. Chair, just so I understand, so I think what's being proposed here, which sounds good to me, is that members would submit motions for ideas for a study sometime before the middle of August. Discussions would take place amongst members informally before our first committee meeting in September. At that first committee meeting in September, we would have an organizational meeting where we hopefully can come to a quick agreement on the committee's work plan for the fall sitting. Is that, Mr. Chair, is that your understanding as well?
That's what I understood.
Or
That's what
am
I understood.
Missing something here?
No, that is what I understood. Just
Thank you, Mr.
Clarification that virtual meetings, official virtual meetings, can't happen after the 23rd because the 23rd of this month of June, the provision for hybrid sittings ends as of the 23rd. There would also be, if we wanted to make it more of an official meeting, I think there would be an issue with resources from Parliament for translation, et cetera, et cetera. So there might be difficulties in having a meeting prior to the House coming back on the 19th of September. That doesn't mean that you could get together informally and have a discussion. This also, by the way, raises another issue. In other committees that I've been on, we've always created a subcommittee, and the subcommittee goes off and does its work, and the work is brought back to the whole committee, and the whole committee does the work all over again. And so we, on those other committees, we actually dispensed with the subcommittee because everybody wanted to be on it. That's just a thought. I think it's probably worth a test fly to see if that approach will work for us, because it would certainly be, I think, a more efficient use of our time for the whole committee to get together and be ready to go. Mr. Brunel-Doucette?
Juste,
I don't want to strike you as crazy. Remember that I'm new here and I don't have as much experience as my honourable colleagues. But don't we have a meeting of the committee next week? I don't understand why we have to wait until mid-August to discuss motions. I did my homework. I was ready today and I was about to move 3 motions. And I was just waiting for my friend, Mr. Oliphant, to propose what he had to propose. I'm ready to table motions. We have a meeting next week. I can't see why we'd waste the 2 hours next week, which is available with the resources of the House, and not put it to them to good use. I think it would be a lack of respect given the office that we hold. I already have motions prepared. I'm prepared to move them this evening. If you have other motions, others can move them next week. We can discuss them, but we do have a meeting next week. Why is it that we would wait when we have 2 hours to meet next week? I don't know if my colleagues have comments to make about this, but I'm ready to save time here, and otherwise we'll be wasting 2 hours next week. I'm not sure I have a handle on this. Perhaps Mr. Oliphant can clarify.
My thought is, or my thinking is, that we have work that is ongoing at the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. We have work that's going on at Foreign Affairs. I think we might want Foreign Affairs to transfer a piece of work to our committee. That takes a little bit of negotiation on Taiwan, for instance. And I think if we can look at what everybody has in mind, that I think it's going to take more than a week to do that. And I know we have notices of motion from Monsieur Bergeron, but I have no idea really what's in the mind of the other parties, and I'm not even sure what's in the mind of my colleagues here. So my sense is that we take our time to do this right. We would still need a meeting to approve the subcommittee report anyway, but I'm open. I don't know. Mr. Chong might have an idea.
Yes, Mr. Chong.
La raison que je...
Well, the reason why I want to make a decision in early September is that the government announced that it will be presenting an Indo-Pacific strategy at that point. Now, were the government to do so before early September, well, then we can review this strategy in our committee, and we can take 3, 4, 5 meetings to review the government's new strategy. Now, if we make a decision now about Mr. Bergeron's motion, well, we won't be able to proceed until late November or December. So that's just one potential reason for making a decision in September and not now.
Ms. McPherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just add to that considering the shortness of time before the end of this parliamentary session, we would want to have this committee be in a place that we could be responsive to current events that conceivably will take place during the following 3 months. And since we are not meeting for about 3 months, I wouldn't want to determine a work plan in June that may be inappropriate in September and October.
Mr. Brunel Doucette?
Effectivement, c'est
Well, my colleagues have raised excellent points. However, one thing's for sure, Mr. Oliphant spoke about Taiwan and about the subcommittee that Mr. Oliphant was referring to. That's on Tuesday, and it was cancelled this week. So I don't think we need to speak any further about that. But as far as what's going to happen over the next 3 weeks, 3 months rather, there is a study that everyone wants to talk about, and that is Taiwan. Mr. Oliphant referred to that, and I think that's quite clear. Now, there's been testimony and a study that was never completed because the writ was dropped. There was never any report drafted on the basis of the evidence that we heard, and I think that it's a priority. That will not affect anything that will occur over the next 3 months. And maybe I shouldn't move my 3 motions now, but I'm sure that there are 2 that will be the subject of unanimity, and I'd like to move them today, potentially. But we don't necessarily need to carry 6, 7, 8 motions. We can await for the other members to move motions, but I would at the very least like to move 2 motions right now. They were shared with committee members, and I believe that they will be the subject of consensus, and I won't have worked and done my homework for nothing. Mr. Chairperson, I don't think it's a problem if we have a meeting next week, if it's the committee's will to hold such a meeting to discuss the fall schedule.
To talk about a potential schedule, if there's an agreement about doing some things in September, provided we don't lock in the entire fall sitting. I'm open to meeting next week to see if there's a consensus amongst members.
Status?
I would just say that that's the purview of the subcommittee. It always has been in terms of discussing a schedule. I've come across this before, that where sometimes that committee, the idea of the whole committee discussing a schedule happens, and I don't find it to be that effective. I think that we leave that to the subcommittee. I understand that my colleague raises the idea in good faith, but based on experience, I think that there's other ways to do it, and the subcommittee ought to take it up.
Mr. Oliphant?
I think there will be unanimity to have a discussion, a study on Taiwan. My concern is that the study that was done in the previous parliament, I would now say, is out of date. It is many things have happened, including in the last 3 weeks, and in the Straits as well as in the area around Taiwan. And also, the Foreign Affairs Committee has had 1 meeting on Taiwan that is a little bit more up to date. That I think could be the testimony could be transferred to this committee. But I actually don't think that the meetings that we had in the previous parliament are completely relevant right now. I actually think things have changed on the security front, especially even in the last 5 days. So I think that we need to go at it cautiously and carefully, and make sure that we're doing the study at the right time, and make sure we have also time for us to make sure that every member of the committee has a chance to put forward ideas. So I am still not in favor of us adopting a work plan tonight. I mean, anyone can always move a motion, but in the spirit of collaboration, I think it would be much better if we worked together and tried to put in everything into one batch of motions and have the subcommittee sort it out.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. Mr. Dubourg.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Well, listen, I think that my colleagues' comments were all worthwhile. However, I'd like to say to my colleague, Mr. Bruno Duceppe, that whilst it's true that we've just adopted routine motions regarding 48-hour notice, but given the proposal that's on the table, the proposal by Mr. Oliphant, Mr. Bruno Duceppe can move his motions today or next week, but the idea behind all of that is to have all of those motions available to the subcommittee that would prioritise those motions and then propose a work plan to the plenary committee. Now, that doesn't mean that the substantive or important motion that Mr. Bruno Duceppe wants to move won't be considered. The key point here is that given that what might occur over the summertime, well, every party will have an opportunity to move the motions that it seeks to move, and that it will be done on the basis of a priority setting. That was all I had to say, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you. Mr. Brunel Doucette.
Oui, sachez que je fais tout.
Well, of course, I'm working in a spirit of collaboration here, as per the motion. What's fabulous with a committee is that even when you start a study, you can suspend it to start another study. The committee is sovereign. It's the master of its own will. And if there is a study that we didn't see coming and that, there will have been a vacation period, it's quite easy. The committee can suspend the study that's already underway and start a new study. The example of Michael's, for example, is there might be a new strategy on the Indo-Pacific proposed by the government. If we already decide to start a study, well, we can suspend that study and turn our attention to the other study, the new study that Michael is referring to, in a spirit of collaboration, of course. Now, what I find unusual here is that folks are saying, oh, yes, we'll hold a meeting next week, but we'll just discuss the full schedule. But what are we going to do next week? Play a card game altogether, a board game perhaps? I'd like to discuss potential motions now that can be moved right now. Everyone's done their homework. And, of course, in the subcommittee, that can be discussed further. And perhaps we might have no choice to address a particular issue, a hot-button issue, at which point we would suspend whatever study is underway. The committee is sovereign and master of its own destiny. So I'd like to move two motions today, and I can wait for the third motion, and then we'll just be essentially doing our job as members of Parliament if we proceed in that manner. So I'd like to move two motions, Mr. Chairperson. Now I'm replacing Stéphane Bergeron, but he gave me very clear instructions. So my friend Stéphane will be very glad that I'm tabling this motion on behalf of him.
We cannot have two motions moved. I would ask that you ask the member to choose one. And I would just note that there has been no discussion between Mr. Bergeron and any member of this committee that I know of about these motions, and that there's an assumption that there will be unanimity, which has not happened. So if it is in the spirit of collaboration, I would suggest that it is best to have a member. We are all, frankly, I'm also very, very disturbed when someone assumes we're not doing our jobs as member of Parliament and only one person is. So I don't think that's a way to start this committee, to have the assumption that one is a member of Parliament and doing their job and we're not. Some of us have not had time to prepare motions, but the point of order is that there should be one motion presented by a member at a time. That's the way the rules of order of this House of Commons works, and all the standing committees. Thank you.
If I could offer something, we have an opportunity through the presentation of motions to develop a landscape of the things that we see as important and worthy of our consideration. The scheduling, the staging of when we talk about them can be certainly up to the subcommittee, and between now and the date that we've picked, August the 15th, the field is open, in fact, for people to submit as many motions as they see fit. What I detect, and I can stand to be corrected, is that there's a sentiment that if we accept a motion now, we've nailed it down to the schedule, that it's going to be first. And that I don't think, based on what we've seen, the changing situation in the relationship with China, that's probably not prudent at this point. It's unnecessary, given that we're not going to have any substantive work on it anyway for some period of time. So in other committees, we've adopted a fairly open approach to this, to bring on all motions, bring them in, put them into the hopper. Let's see, in fact, what the interests of the committee in total are, and leave it to the subcommittee or the whole committee as we see fit to determine then the sequencing of these motions. It's also been a practice in committees that I've been on that we spread it around. We'll take a motion from the Bloc, then a motion from the Conservatives, motion from the Liberals, motion from the NDP, so that each of us in turn has an opportunity to marshal the committee's energies behind a certain subject or a certain study. So as chair, I'll just make a suggestion that we invite motions, put them on the table, and put them into that landscape that we're creating in order to find out what the interests of the committee might be. Any thoughts on that? Mr. Bernal-Dessette?
Oui, moi, ça,
That suits me, and you summed up my thought process, but I'd like to turn back to Mr. Oliphant's point of order. I wasn't saying that he wasn't doing his job, but by saying that, we have this meeting next week and the resources of the House are available to us, and I just wasn't wanting to imply that there's a lack of a desire to work. Mr. Oliphant is a hard worker. He has a great reputation, and it would be a pity if we got off on the wrong foot. But that said, knowing that we have a 2-hour time slot available to us, and if that's wasted, that means that it's a pity and it's a waste, and we're not doing our job. That's what I'm saying. I don't think our fellow citizens would be happy with us either. But I appreciate your comment, Mr. Chairperson, and I think that you've hit the nail on the head. I think what you've proposed is helpful, and everyone will have time to draft their motions. And as long as everyone can do this with a view to getting it done by next week, that is, and next week's meeting.
One thing that we should probably try and confirm is if indeed we do have meeting time available to us next week with the resources of the House. Madam Clerk?
I think we do.
Okay.
Point de clarification.
On a point of clarification, Mr. Chairperson, it's a meeting of the subcommittee that we're talking about here, or the committee itself?
Is the proposal to meet as a subcommittee next week or to meet as a committee?
I would suggest that we meet as a committee.
Sure.
So
Fine by me.
that each and every one of us who has an interest that they'd like to, see fleshed out in a study has that opportunity to present a motion. Any other thoughts on that?
Frankly, we have, I think 9 or 8 notices of motion ready to go, which I have not done because I wanted to discuss them with colleagues. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, 6, just 6 motions of possible studies. And we can present them all, but I would like to have us look at them all and try to have a discussion about what is best. I think you need to think about how you start a study and how you scope it out and what it could be in terms of a project as opposed to just rushing to do a study. Or else, the results will be as good as the effort that's put into it. So I mean, we can put these all in, and we'll have notice of motion, and they can be discussed next week. They can all be moved next week as well. But I'm not sure that's the best way to work. Or else we end up having one motion presented, as we are doing in Foreign Affairs Committee, and it could go on. It is now going on for 4 weeks on one motion. I don't want that to happen here. I'd like us to actually, have a roundtable, almost committee of the whole kind of discussion about what we want to do and how we are going to do it. I think it'd be healthier. It would be a good way to do it.
Back on the prairies, we used to enjoy potluck dinners where everybody brought their specialty, and we all enjoyed a piece of it. I would suggest that if next week's meeting was our opportunity to bring our pot of motions along and lay them all on the table, ask questions of each other about what is meant, where we think we're going with a proposed study, et cetera, that could be, Mr. Oliphant, the collaborative approach that then informs how we sequence the studies that need to be done. Remembering, though, that this relationship with China is complicated and it's variable. It changes very quickly, as we've seen so many times, so that what we may discuss next week might be quite substantially out the window by the time fall comes. And we always have to allow for that dynamic. So, yes, Mr. Fragastatos, save me here.
You don't need saving. Never have. But the way I see things going, so say we meet next week as a committee, would we decide which particular studies we would take up 3 months after the fact? That's my worry. As you just said, this is a very fluid relationship that Canada has with China, to put it mildly. And so we would be, I'm not sure how good that would be for this committee to take up. I don't see the utility there. So if we get together and exchange ideas, I suppose that's well and good as far as getting to know each other better and hearing out what the various MPs on the committee would want to pursue as far as future studies go. But I don't know if that is the best use of our time. Again, we would meet next week. Parliament is adjourning shortly, as we know, and then we meet 3 months again later to take up a study that might be out of date entirely. There might be much more pressing situations to take up at that time. That's my concern.
Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an idea to try to get things moving along here. I've heard from Mr. Oliphant as well as Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe qui veut étudier l'enjeu de Taiwan.
Who wants to study the issue of Taiwan? That's very clear. Mr. Brunel-Duceppe has moved a notice of motion on Taiwan, and Mr. Oliphant has said that he wants to study Taiwan too.
Could agree to study Taiwan when we come back in September, with the provision that if other matters come up, that the study be suspended, to deal with what other urgent matters come up at that time. And we always can continue the Taiwan study after whatever urgent matter has been disposed of. So perhaps we could come to next week's meeting with an idea of how many meetings on Taiwan we would have. I know the notice of motion that Mr. Brunel-Duceppe has presented is suggesting 6 meetings. If we could arrive on a consensus of how many meetings we would have, then at least the clerks and analysts over the summer can prepare, at least 2 or 3 meetings when we come back. And so we hit the ground running. And so I would be supportive of doing that if there's a consensus on the committee. So I'm just trying to help things along here so that we could get a consensus. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there an appetite then to have Mr. Brunel-Duceppe make the motion and for us to handle that? Seeing no objections, Mr. Brunel-Duceppe.
So I do have some concerns about it because it is referring to a previous parliament, and I'm very happy tonight It isn't in the motion? I read the motion.
Mr. Chair, on a point of order, the motion that the second motion that concerns Taiwan does not refer to the previous Parliament.
It's the second paragraph.
Why don't we let it move it until we do something?
So the motion that was given is one motion. It's not three motions. But it's a notice of motion, avis de motion. It's one motion. It's got three parts. It continues, and
Mr. Oliphant, do you have
well,
something further to add?
I have no trouble. I mean, we had our second motion that we would be presenting is about Taiwan. So the first one is about a kickoff with officials to give us the lay of the land, where we bring in the acting ambassador, the chargé d'affaires, we bring in the China desk, we bring in the key officials to give us an in-camera briefing on what do we need to know about everything to get us going. That would be our first idea of what we do. The second one, we believe our first substantial study should probably be Taiwan, with the caveat that if the Indo-Pacific strategy wants to take precedence over that because it emerges, I'll be interested, just as you will be. That would be good. So we have no trouble with the concept of this. We're just trying to find a way to do it that actually is fair to the analysts, to make sure that they have time to prepare, to scope out a study about what are we talking about Taiwan? Are we talking about multilateral engagement like at the WHO and other places? Are we talking about peace and security issues and buzzing around? Are we talking about threats to their security? Are we talking about American engagement? Are we, there's lots we could talk about around Taiwan. I'd just like it scoped out. To study Taiwan is big. Are we talking about trade and investment? It's our biggest trading partner in that part of the world. There's lots we could do about Taiwan. I just think we need to scope out a study. I would agree tonight, if we can, by consensus, to say our first significant study will be Taiwan, and ask the analysts to help us come up with a study on Taiwan. I would do that. No dilemma whatsoever, and using previous resources. I think we are agreed to do Taiwan. I just want to make sure we have flexibility.
Is there, Mr. Oliphant, is there a difficulty with the fact that there appears to be three motions collapsed into one notice of motion? Is that a technical sticking point for you?
Can I clarify, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. I don't know why it's one notice of motion. It's supposed to be three separate motions. That's what it is. I thought that much was clear. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding at the outset. But, Mr. Oliphant's idea is a good one, i.e., that we ask the analysts to come back with a wording for a motion on a study on Taiwan, and it would suit me to discuss that next week. And as I said earlier, if anything occurs over the summer, and that may very well happen, well, at that point, we drop that motion that would be underway, and we'd move a motion to start a new study. But just to respond to my friend, my Liberal colleague, yes, you propose studies on issues 2, 3, 4 months ahead of time, but it's aspirational. One doesn't control circumstances, what's happening on the ground in various countries. This is the same for the Human Rights Committee, for the Immigration Committee. Sometimes you intend to study something, 3 or 4 months down the track, and then suddenly something happens and all that goes by the wayside. And the same is true at the Foreign Affairs Committee. It's just the way things are. I think there's a consensus that we're starting to get at here based on Michael's ideas and Mr. Oliphant's comments and also your judicious counsel, Mr. Chairperson. We should ask the analysts to come up with a draft study on Taiwan. We can discuss it next week, and next week we can move that motion so that we study that issue when we come back in September, if that suits everyone. I think that I can see a consensus around the table, more or less along those lines.
Ms. Dancho?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure, is Mr. Brunel Duceppe saying, did you want to clarify? So I was going to make this suggestion, I think, les deux gens, Mr. Oliphant, puis Mr.
I suggest that Mr. Oliphant and Mr. Brunel Duceppe have good ideas, and I don't know whether Ms. McPherson wanted us to do a study on Taiwan, but clearly the Liberals, the Bloc, the Conservatives want a study on Taiwan. That much is clear.
Ideas. I do think Mr. Oliphant laid out a very responsible plan. I love the idea of having like an intro from the officials. That sounds like a great way to kick off this committee. But I also appreciate that Mr. Brunel Duceppe's team has done the hard work of already bringing forward a motion. So I would suggest that we have the subcommittee meet and sort of talk about this. I think we're really getting into the weeds here. I think you'd get a lot more done if the four of you can meet and settle on what to do. We have the time next Tuesday or Monday, so I would suggest the four of you get in a room and finalize this. Otherwise, we can be here for another 45 minutes and not get a lot done. So I would just suggest that's what happens on Monday next week.
How does that look to all?
That sounds great, Mr. Chair.
Do we need a motion to that effect, or can we just wave a magic
I think to be fair to the analyst, we should give a little bit. If anything, if nothing is expected of the analyst by next Monday, that's fine. That's fair. If something is expected in terms of the scope of his study, I think we have to tell him a little bit more about what we're talking about. What I would suggest is we don't do that tonight. We actually say that meeting, we'll talk about that and together in a circle try to come up with how much of it do we want to do on multilateral engagement. There are many topics because we've studied Taiwan before at other committees. We can kind of come up with something, I think. But I think we need to be a little bit more specific before we get the analyst to actually prepare something. Because Taiwan's a big issue.
Mr. Chair, I think that's why I suggested you meet as a subcommittee.
Yeah, let the
Very well
subcommittee just
outlined.
meet without the analysts having done the work, and then we come up with something. Then the analyst can do some work over the summer because he doesn't get holidays.
We don't either, you know. Does that represent to all a reasonable agenda for a meeting next week, next Monday? Yes. Very good. Then we'll make it so, Madam Clerk. Very good. Any other business? I get to do this. Adjourn. Thank you.